on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain.
Hello and welcome viewers, I'm Pia and you're watching Gulf Today on NewsX World. On that note, let's take a look at the headlines this hour. The United Nations has called the shooting of 2 Palestinian men in Jenin by Israeli forces as an apparent summary execution. Israel states that the men were linked to a terror network, while rights groups and the Palestinian Authority have condemned the killings as extrajudicial. Thousands marched from Hyde Park Corner to Whitehall in central London to support Palestinians. One of the attendees, Nadia Harak, has stated that the fight isn't over, highlighting the ongoing struggles faced by innocent Palestinians. Demonstrators in Tel Aviv have called on Israel to secure the return of 2 deceased hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza. The protest follows a US-mediated deal that released 20 living hostages and pledged 28 bodies, with 2 unaccounted for at the moment. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara visited Aleppo to mark a year since his Islamist-led forces captured the city and later toppled the Bashar al-Assad-led government. Shara has placed Aleppo's rebirth as a turning point for Syria's new history. Iraq's Kurdistan region has agreed with Dana Gas to resume production at the Khormor gas field after a rocket attack disrupted supplies and caused power cuts. Officials praised the company's resilience and vowed to hold the attackers accountable. A small group of Turks have protested Pope Leo XIV's visit, claiming that it threatened Turkey's sovereignty. During his first visit to a Muslim place of worship, the Blue Mosque, as the Pope, he toured Istanbul and showcased respect but did not pray. Kazakhstan criticized Ukraine for a drone strike on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's Black Sea terminal, halting operations. The Foreign Ministry has called it the third attack on the civilian facility and protested the targeting of critical infrastructure. A Russian missile strike hit Visha Road, killing 1 person and injuring 5. According to regional emergency services, firefighters have battled burning buildings as residents have been evacuated. Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. The United Nations has condemned the killing of 2 Palestinian men in the occupied West Bank, describing it as an apparent summary execution. The incident occurred in Jenin, where despite the men's surrender, Israeli forces opened fire, claiming that the individuals were affiliated with a terror network. Human rights groups, including B'Tselem, have condemned the actions as an execution. The Israeli military has launched an investigation, while National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has publicly defended the actions of the security forces. The Palestinian Authority has labeled the killings as a war crime. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Shasha Machta, political commentator, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Of course, the United Nations coming out and giving a reaction to the recent killing that has taken place in Jenin in the West Bank. Israeli forces are, of course, probing the current incident, but we have seen a defense by Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's justified this particular killing. In light of all of this, in your assessment, even if those who were involved, because they were surrendering and they had in fact removed their upper clothes as well, and they did lay down their arms, should then have due process of law being followed in this particular case, rather than, as the United Nations has pointed out, a summary execution?
Yeah, so first of all, let's clear up who these 2 men were. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad has actually claimed responsibility for these 2 men. So they were, of course, part of this terror network that was building bombs and planning terror attacks against the state of Israel. That's why Israel carries out so many raids in the West Bank and in Jenin to, of course, protect its people. But yeah, the video of the execution of the shooting was concerning to everyone. It is, of course, something that will have to be investigated, and it is being investigated in the IDF. The IDF, of course, carries out probes and investigations to any hints or any indications of misconduct by its soldiers. This is one of the strengths of the Israeli democracy and of having IDF, of having an army in a democracy. The killing itself, it's a very, very complicated situation. Of course, nobody should be killing someone once they have surrendered. At the same time, so the soldiers themselves have claimed that they still felt endangered. So it's very hard to understand what exactly has happened, and this will require a probe and an investigation before actually labeling it as a war crime or labeling it as some blank execution. So we're just gonna have to wait and see what the results of this probe are, and of course it will be investigated and legal action will be taken. Regarding the defense by people like Ben Gvir, it's a very complicated to point fingers at soldiers nowadays in Israel after the trauma we've faced for 2 years, after the terror and suffering after October 7th, and after seeing so many terrorists both in Gaza and the West Bank planning and plotting the next massacre of Israelis and of Jews. It is a very traumatic thing to label soldiers as criminals. And of course, if this is the case, and if the investigation actually shows misconduct, then there will be no problem in doing so. But it's a very, very, very problematic and controversial thing to do, to point fingers before this investigation in Israel domestically, just because of all the sacrifice that the soldiers have made and everything they've gone through. And for now, they've said that they felt at risk and that the terrorists might have taken action against them. So we're just gonna have to wait and see what the investigation is gonna come out with.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us. We're tracking some further updates, this time from the United Kingdom. We're learning that thousands of people gathered in central London in a show of support for Palestinians. Demonstrators marched from Hyde Park Corner to Whitehall, ending in a rally outside Downing Street. One of the attendees, Nadia Harak, has stated that the fight isn't over. Innocent Palestinians are struggling. The protest highlights, of course, international concern over the situation in the Middle East. On that note, let's listen into what the protesters had to say.
Here because the fight isn't over. Innocent Palestinians are still really struggling and going through hell at the minute, and this is the least we can do, coming out and showing up to show that, you know, we're here for them, we support them, and the Zionist regime needs to come down. And the only way it will come down is by people coming together, standing together, and telling the world that, you know, what they're doing is wrong. It's a crime. They're criminals, and they need to be held accountable.
I'm here because we're living in the belly of the beast. We're living under a Labour government that is arming and funding the settler colonial state of Israel, who are slaughtering Palestinians, taking their lands, their homes, their hospitals, taking everything from them. And we stand in solidarity with the fight back, with the resistance. We stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza, who are facing the most appalling conditions of life. And Britain is in huge part responsible.
You know, this is my kind of way of feeling less isolated. You see all these bad stuff in the news, we're funding a genocide, and you just think, how's everyone okay with this? How are we letting this happen? And I think going to things like this, it kind of shows there's a community of people that agree with you.
Israel has caused an open-air prison in Gaza, and now they're just destroying every building, and they're trying to erase the Palestinians from their own land. And I feel very strongly that it's a wrong, it's immoral, it's just completely wrong.
So with us on the broadcast is Mr. Sasha Machta. Interesting statements coming in. We have seen these protests taking place over the last 2 years since the war broke out. On one hand, there are people there are all shades of opinions that people in these protests hold. Some of them have rather extreme opinions stating that Israel is committing a genocide. Some are more moderate in their opinions stating that the path towards a two-state solution is the ideal solution. What do you make of these protests that have taken place in the UK?
The most telling statement that we've heard in the past video, of course, was the Zionist regime. This is exactly depicting what these protests are. They are protests that do not recognize and are against the simple existence of the State of Israel. These protests worldwide have begun on October 7th. Protests against the State of Israel and supporting the Palestinian cause began immediately after the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It had nothing to do with Israel's response. It began before, and of course it's part of this scheme by Hamas and their backers to actually put in an anti-Israel narrative and this extreme pro-Palestinian narrative into Western media, into universities, and into the hearts and minds of so many people. That's why on October 7th, when the war broke out, when Hamas launched their brutal attack, there were already people that were protesting on behalf of Palestine. This has nothing to do with the rights of the Palestinians. This has nothing to do with a better future. There's nothing to do with two states even, because a Jew or an Israeli, if they were to walk at one of these protests, I'm not sure what their fate would be. I think that these are radicalized groups. Of course, some people might have good intentions, but when Hamas is cheering on and when the Iranian Islamic Republic is cheering on these protests, we know that there is something wrong with them. When these protests are calling for the death of Jews, for the death of Israel, and not even recognize Israel, there is something deeply wrong as well. This is a trend that's going on all throughout the world, especially in Europe. It comes from this meeting of the radical Islam that has been unfiltered in Europe, meeting the extreme left and being fueled by mass disinformation and by a media campaign warfare against Israel and Jews worldwide. We saw what this led to already in Manchester with the shooting at a synagogue on the holiest Jewish day of the year. And it's a very, very scary time to be Jewish in these European capitals where many places are no-go zones for them anymore. And my hope is that we will have a future between Israel and Palestinians, a future of peace and coexistence, not because of these protesters, but in spite of these protesters.
Absolutely, sir. Requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some further updates. This time from within Israel itself, we're learning that protesters have gathered in Tel Aviv, calling on the Israeli government to ensure the return of 2 deceased hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza. This follows a US-mediated agreement that saw Hamas release 20 living hostages and pledge to return 28 bodies, but 2 still remain unaccounted for. Meanwhile, the death toll from the offensive in Gaza has surpassed 70,000, according to Gaza's health ministry. Despite ongoing accusations being traded of ceasefire violations, both sides have reaffirmed their commitment to the truce that was brokered by the United States of America. Remember, there was also a UN resolution, Security Council resolution, that was accepted unanimously. There was no veto power that was used by China and Russia either, who abstained from the vote. Let's, in fact, on that note, listen in to what families of the hostages that have yet to be returned had to say.
We will continue on a week-to-week basis think what is the best alternative and actions in order to bring back Ran Gwili and the Thai citizen Ran Tilak in order to keep the pressure and the awareness on the topic. We will keep doing these types of demonstrations, rallies in different parts of Israel, and we always said from the beginning, all for one, one for all. And we will continue to do so until we get those 2 remaining hostages back to their families.
Well, we still have 2 last hostages held by Hamas, and I think we should try and come each Saturday or any other day of the week and be here and remind everybody that we need those 2 hostages back. We have to bring them back because this is our values. This is what, you know, the basic of us, of the people of Israel and the state of Israel. So we cannot let go. We have to make sure that we are bringing back these 2 hostages, that Hamas will bring them back to us.
Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Sasha Masta. We've just heard of the families of the hostages who've still managed to maintain their composure after 2 years of trauma. They're still out emphasizing that one for all for one, awaiting the return of the remains of their loved ones that are still in Gaza at the moment. With this first phase not being entirely implemented, a broader plan already being approved by the UN Security Council, do you think this is a tactic by Hamas by not providing all the bodies back to Israel with 2 still left? Is it a tactic to delay the implementation of the second phase, which calls for disarmament?
Yeah, this is definitely a tactic used by Hamas to extract concessions and to play games with both Israel and the mediators to try and seek ways to survive and stay in power. And of course, they still believe and see a horizon where they will still be the rulers and the basically, yeah, in control of the Gaza Strip. So right now it's a critical situation because Hamas has already been violating the ceasefire after they didn't meet the 72 hours since the ceasefire began, where they had to return all of the deceased hostages. They actually released slowly. They started releasing bodies. We're now up to 26 deceased hostages that have returned, but they have kept saying that they don't know where they are. Then they try and bring in their terrorists into the Israel yellow line side to try and find the bodies. They already know where most of them are. In fact, I remember one of the videos that came out where they buried a body that they already had, and then they magically seemed to discover it and brought the Red Cross. So this is not a surprise to any of us here in Israel. It shouldn't be a surprise to the world either. And that's why the pressure should be on Hamas for the last 2 bodies to return, because if they don't, this is just going to be a tool and a tactic used by Hamas to deceive the world and to try and stay in power. And by doing so, it's going to bring more misery to the people of Gaza that deserve to be led not by Hamas terrorists, but by people that actually prioritize their lives and that prioritize their economic prosperity and actually seek a future side by side with Israel. So the 2 remaining bodies are very important. Doesn't matter if it is Israeli or Thai, each hostage is worth everything to us. And the families that have suffered for so long deserve the proper burial and closure with the return of their dear ones. And we just wish that they would have returned home alive.
Absolutely. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time sharing your perspective with us on the broadcast today. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus away from what's taking place in Israel to what's happening in Syria. We're now learning that Syria has marked 1 year since Islamist forces captured Aleppo and launched a campaign that toppled former President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Syrian leader Ahmad al-Sharaa has now visited the northern city. Speaking to a crowd outside Aleppo's famous citadel, al-Sharaa has stated that the city's quote-unquote rebirth marked a new history for all in Syria. He's later appeared atop the citadel next to a large Syrian flag. Aleppo was an early center of anti-Assad protests in 2011 and later was divided between government loyalists in the west and rebels in the east. Russian support helped Assad's forces regain full control in December 2016. Now, al-Sharaa's forces seized Aleppo in late November last year and later captured Damascus, ending decades of the Assad family's rule. With us on the broadcast is Ms. Shruti Dasgupta, international affairs expert, joining to share her insights. Interesting statements coming in from al-Sharaa. He has stated that, today marks 1 year since the city's quote-unquote rebirth, as well as a new history for all in Syria. Interesting use of the word all, because we do know there have been attacks taking place against minorities within the Syrian territory, even after al-Shara has come to power. There are issues being faced in the south by the Druze at large. The Israelis have had to step in order to stop these attacks as well. What do you make of his remarks at the outset and the sort of tone that he is setting for the Syrians at large?
Well, Syria for Syrians is something that al-Shara needs to learn, because I do know that not just the Druze, the Alawites and the Christians are also facing atrocities at the hands of al-Shara's HDS members, whatever name he wants to give them today. But those defense forces under his command are either running riot without his knowledge or with his permission, and continuing to escalate tensions under the name of sectarian violence in the region of Syria. You're right. The Israeli forces had to step in to protect the Druze, but the Druze themselves rejected Israeli forces and their attacks because it is detrimental to their existence in that region. There are also heightened tensions around the Golan Heights region with the Syrian regime as of now. What I do understand is that al-Shara talks well. He is putting out the right feelers in terms of media bites, but what is happening on ground is completely different. There are definitely forces that are celebrating his rebirth of Syria through rebirth of Aleppo, but it does not really translate into an all-around inclusive Syrian society when you are hearing of the recent attack itself around the borders of Syria, showing that maybe the tensions with Israel would probably escalate. So I do hope that al-Shara wisens up and leaves and sheds not just the uniform and his former name, but also the intent that he was conducting those attacks at when he was Al-Julani. And I hope he does turn into a leader that the Syrian people and the region deserves, because it is a resource-rich region and its people have suffered a long, protracted civil war, as well as a regime that may not have worked for everybody.
Indeed, you have mentioned his past. We do know that he has a way with words as well. Now, considering his own history, how should he now balance the developmental aspirations of the people, ties with the West that are burgeoning, and the fact that, yes, the international community does have expectations from him in the shoes that he's now filled as president. The fact that even though he's looking at taking forward the developmental aspirations, it should be done in an inclusive manner. How, in your assessment, should he balance this out?
Do you think he can? I don't know whether a man out of uniform, just because you can, like I've always stated, you can take a man out of Al-Qaeda, but you can't take out the ideology out of him. And that is exactly what is reflected in the atrocities, though now the reports of which have lessened. But in October 25, the UN Security Council also noted that there are sectarian violences happening, very specific genocidal actions happening against those who do not believe in the same ideology as what the al-Shara sect under the HDS follows. So I don't know how he's going to do it, but I do know that Moscow has shaken hands with him, and so has Washington, and the West seems to have hope that maybe this time they'll get it right, but I don't have much hope in that man itself, because the constitution that they have upheld allows the president, which is the post that he's holding, to appoint a third of the elected people in the House. So even though there might be elections and there might be other things happening, he will still have a larger control on the politics of the region. I feel he's just another stooge that has replaced the Alawite favoring Assad regime, but I don't know the future of the nation. I hope that the minorities survive. I hope that the peace in Middle East comes through, but I highly doubt it would be under this man.
Indeed, and you've also in fact mentioned the West. This is a mistake that they keep making time and time again, and they just don't seem to be learning. It's more like, in your assessment, do you think the West usually looks at short-term games rather than a long-term perspective, and what exactly is it that has driven the US to back him? Because interestingly, we've discussed this before as well, the tweet by the US Embassy in Syria declaring a bounty on his head for 10 million, that's still up.
That's still up, and if they take it down, they would one be acknowledging that Al-Shara, though renamed, is actually Al-Julani, and he has had the price of human life on his head. So this is something interesting. The West seems to be unable to outgrow their colonial mindset that if they place somebody in power, then that person is going to be their vassal, and they can control the politics as well as the resources of that region. That doesn't really happen. We've seen that in Africa, in the African nations also. They keep putting these warlords in power, and then they find that the situation is completely out of control. The human life loss, the resources loss is too extravagant to even define. But same is with Syria. They feel they have put in a place, a pawn that they can manipulate and have a picture-perfect moment, like his current media bites, where it looks good, but it is not really good on ground. How do you justify slapping him on the back and calling him a strong, brave warrior when he's killing Christians in Syria? How do you justify yourself as a pro-Christian government, as the Trump regime claims, but still not have him account for the loss of life? How do you be a good Islamic nation when he's killing Druze who claim to be of Islamic tendency? How do you claim to be good for Islam when you're killing Alawites just because they're a different sect of Islam? So this is something that the world needs to understand, that you cannot put a warlord, you cannot expect better out of a warlord, because for years and years the brainwashing that goes beyond into making of a warlord does not go away in the snap of a finger and the gaining of a power seat.
Absolutely. Ms. Dasgupta, I'd like to thank you. The larger question, of course, as she's pointed out, is the fact that, whether a suit can really erase the blood on Al-Shara's hands. On that note, we're shifting focus away from Syria towards what's taking place in Iraq. We're now learning that Iraqi Prime Minister Masroor Barzani has stated that Iraq's Kurdistan region has agreed with the company operating the Khormor gas field to restart production within hours in order to restore electricity. The Khormor gas field is one of the largest in the Kurdistan region, which provides supplies for regional power generation. Now, according to the joint field operator, a rocket had struck a storage tank at the gas field, leading to production shutdown and extensive power cuts. There were no immediate claims of responsibility, and the authorities have not yet responded as to who was behind this particular attack, but it does seem that there's a resolution on the anvil. Shifting focus to news coming in from Turkey, we're now learning that a small group of protesters in Turkey demonstrated against Pope Leo XIV's visit, voicing opposition to the visit itself, the United States and the CIA as well. The protesters claimed that the Pope's visit undermined Turkey's sovereignty and independence. Meanwhile, the Pope, during his 4-day visit to the country, he went to Istanbul's iconic Blue Mosque. In a gesture of respect, he removed his shoes but did not engage in prayer. Listen in to what some of the protesters had to say.
14. Leo ve Fener Rum Patriği Bartolomeos, bu basit bir dini ziyaret ve dini toplantı değil. Bu Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nin ve CİA'nın bir ortak operasyonudur. Bu Türkiye'ye ve Rusya'ya karşı bir haçlı seferidir. Ve Türkiye'nin egemenliğini...
Papa 14. Leo, Türkiye'ye olan ziyaretini ABD emperyalizminin ekümenik planı kapsamında yapmıştır. CIA görevleri çerçevesinde bu ziyareti yapmıştır. Türk gençliği olarak bizler hiçbir zaman Türkiye'nin ve milletimizin bağımsızlığını hedef alan bu planlara karşı geçit vermeyiz.
In other news, Pope Leo XIV has arrived in Lebanon today for the second and final leg of his first overseas trip as the leader of the Catholic Church. The first U.S. Pope will now meet Lebanon's President and Prime Minister and address national leaders, appealing for peace in a country that has witnessed tumult recently, whether it's through Israeli airstrikes as well as regional conflict fomented by the Hezbollah. Lebanon hosts over 1 million Syrian and Palestinian refugees and is still recovering from years of economic crisis as well. Leaders hope that the Pope's visit will bring hope and encourage dialogue. Pope Leo's itinerary includes visits to 5 cities and towns, an outdoor mass on the Beirut waterfront, and a prayer at the site of the 2020 explosion at the port that killed 200 people. On that note, viewers, it's a wrap on Gulf Today. We will continue to track all of these updates very, very closely, but we're dipping into a quick short break.